It's very possible we're just overthinking Alabama and therefore underrating them.
You are Locked On College Football, your daily podcast on all things college football. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Welcome, everybody, to another episode of Locked On College Football. I'm your host, Spencer McLaughlin. Thank you so much for making this your first listen or your first view every day. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day and your daily source to stay up to date with the biggest stories in the greatest sport on planet Earth. Realignment, coaching carousel, the portal, and more. We've always got you covered. Today's episode is brought to you by our friends over at FanDuel. Make every moment more. Right now, new customers get $150 in bonus bets with any winning $5 bet. That's $150 with any winning $5 bet. Visit FanDuel.com/lockedon to get started. One of those $5 bets could be Alabama to make the playoff, which has plus odds. That's kind of crazy. That's Luke Robinson, Locked On Alabama, to join me here on the show. I've been thinking about this, Luke, because Alabama's win total is 9.5, and the early impressions of the Kalen DeBoer era were, well, he's got some roster building to do because a lot of guys are leaving the portal. And then you look at the transfer portal class and you're like, well, there's a starter, there's a starter, there's a starter. They were already good there. They're already pretty good there. They've got promising talent there. Oh, they did keep Ryan Williams at receiver. They have all these other guys. But Kalen DeBoer is the factor that I can't overlook, or I'm trying not to overlook with Alabama, because in 2 years at Washington, he inherited a 4-8 program, and he went 11-2 and then went to the national championship game. I think it's pretty reasonable to think that he comes into Alabama and is a 10-plus game winner right away.
I think so too. First of all, thanks for having me. Secondly, I definitely think this is a bye. Alabama fans don't get a chance for the bye much. I mean, we do it anyway because, look, the joke around here, and I've been in Alabama for a long time, and I've bet on Alabama several times. And I can tell you right now, the lines are always inflated when it comes to Alabama, at least around these parts. Now, I mean, if you're betting in Vegas, it's one thing. But around here, they're always going to be inflated because they know people don't care. They're going to bet on Alabama regardless. But I'll say this. I think there's a golden opportunity here because I believe where these odds are coming in terms of where Alabama factors into the SEC this year. A lot of people say they're going to be the fourth or fifth best team in the SEC. Well, they're looking at it from the lens of, okay, now Georgia's the new Bama. That's what they're looking at. Okay, and that's fair enough.
Yep.
Even though Alabama went to the playoffs last year and Georgia didn't, and Alabama beat Georgia last year. I get it. Georgia won back-to-back natties. They deserve that. I give it to them. Okay? Now, if you're going to do that, that's fine. Then you're going to say Texas. Well, Texas went to the playoffs last year. They lost just like Alabama did. They did beat Alabama at Bama's place, but I would argue Alabama was a different team from that point forward. And so you want to put Texas there because they have the talent in Quinn Ewers? I get that too. Then you come to Missouri and Mississippi. And I think it all factors in with the schedule there. They're both of their schedules are much, much easier than Alabama's. Neither one of them has to play Georgia and Alabama. Georgia does travel to Ole Miss, and Missouri does go to Bama. And I feel like Alabama will win that game. But other than that, what are Missouri's toughest contests? I mean, they have Auburn for homecoming. They have the only other choice they could have had for that would have been Oklahoma, probably, which wouldn't have been a good choice either. But their non-conference is incredibly manageable, if not downright easy. I say the same for Ole Miss. So I see where people are coming from, and I also think there's Bama fatigue. That is very real, and people want to, outside of the state of Alabama, they want to pick against Alabama, and it's kind of boring and mundane to keep putting Alabama way up there. But I'm going to tell you something. I feel like Alabama's going to be on the playoffs. I would also say take the over on the 9.5. Even though Alabama's schedule is tough, I look at somebody like Georgia's. Nobody's talking about Georgia's because, again, they feel like they're the old Alabama, right? Georgia's got to go to Texas. They got to go to Bama. They got to go to Ole Miss. I mean, they got Clemson at the very beginning of the season. I'm just telling you, I think Georgia's primed for having two losses themselves and still make the playoffs with two losses, by the way. And I think that's what Alabama could do. I could easily see Alabama losing two games. But at the same time, I don't see them losing any more than that. So I feel like Georgia and Alabama will both make the playoffs.
I think that's entirely possible. The odds, you mentioned them being a little bit peculiar when it comes to Bama because of how well known they are and people want to bet against them. They have the fourth best odds to win the SEC. You have Georgia, you have Texas, you have Ole Miss, whose roster I like a lot, and I like the head coach quarterback combo that you have there in Oxford, to be sure, but they don't play Alabama this year, as Luke mentioned. And then you have Alabama. And then in the odds to make the playoff, Alabama is again fourth behind those three teams. And then in the national championship odds, Alabama is fifth. And suddenly they're not behind anybody except Georgia and Texas there in the SEC. And I look at Kalen DeBoer and go, the last 3 seasons, full seasons of college football, he's been a head coach. He's won double-digit games. He did that at Fresno State in his second year. He did it at Washington his first year. And he did it at Washington his second year and made a deep playoff run. He is accustomed to elevating programs, even if he's not inheriting the best team. Certainly Washington was much better in year 2 than they were in year 1. But in year 1, they were still very, very good. And I don't think Alabama's going undefeated here. But I just keep looking at their schedule going, I think they've got enough. I think they have enough, Luke. So when you compare Alabama's roster with the portal moves that they have made, and you factor in that Kalen DeBoer is a fantastic game day, in-game coach. He is a maestro in that sense, one of the best in the country. Where do you see Alabama compared to the rest of the SEC right now?
Look, I want to get a little further down the road before making an actual prediction, but if I were predicting right now, I probably would have Alabama in the SEC title game. Or at the very least, the next in line for that game. That's what I think. I'm not as high on some teams as others are. I mean, Ole Miss, for example. Let me say this. I would enjoy Ole Miss's being good. But let's also remember, while all these people are saying, oh, they're the dark horse to win it all, they've never won the West. They've had it.
Well, it's a tall order.
It is a tall order. Arkansas has done it, I think, 3 times. Mississippi State.
Okay, that's fair. That's fair. Very fair.
Everybody's done it except A&M and Ole Miss, and now there is no more West. But my point is, they've never been to an SEC championship game to win an SEC championship, and now they are the supposed third best team in this conference. Look, I get it. I understand they have got a good roster. I like Lane Kiffin. He's a fun follow on Twitter. And I listened to an interview the other day, and he was great. But, I mean, at some point, don't you have to say, okay, things are what they are. Now, for those who want to say, well, Washington went to the playoffs last year and won the national championship game. They also went to the playoffs in 2016. That Washington has not been like a punching bag this whole time. They've been pretty good. Texas, it took them a while, but once they finally got on track, they're still Texas. They still probably have more resources than anybody in the country. So, and they made the playoffs. Mississippi doesn't have that luxury. So let's see. They brought in a bunch of talent. I'm high on Ole Miss. I would love to see them be good, but until they do it, it's kind of hard for me personally to buy into it. So yeah, I'm higher on Alabama than I am on Ole Miss, and I'm also a Bammer. So there's that.
Yeah, there is that factor. All stand in Ole Miss's corner just for a moment for the fans in Oxford listening or watching out there. Georgia hadn't won a national championship in 40 years until they did. I mean, no one.
The East, and they had won the SEC.
That's true. That is entirely true. I'm just the Josh Pate conundrum, if you will. Can't versus haven't. I think Ole Miss has a team that can. I do agree, though, that there is a mental hurdle that has to be overcome for some programs when you haven't gotten to that level before. And Lane Kiffin has had a lot of success. I think he can have a lot of success. He might be the best follow on Twitter or best coach in the media space, but that doesn't matter as much when you get on game days. I just think they've got the talent to push, or at least contend, play with the best teams in the SEC.
Yeah, and I know, welcome to Locked On Rebels, but I mean, I do find them to be one of the more interesting stories this year. One of the more interesting stories ever since Lane Kiffin's been there, and maybe even back when Hugh Freeze was there. But a couple of things. First of all, if they were going to do it, why didn't they do it last year? It was right there for the taking. They had Alabama.
Well, they didn't have the defense last year. They gave up however many points to LSU in that crazy game that they ended up winning, by the way.
They won, but they couldn't beat Alabama, and their offense sort of failed them a little bit in that one too. And they had Alabama, they had us on the ropes, and they couldn't finish us off. So that makes me feel like, yeah, there's a hurdle they can't get over. And the other thing that's funny, our cohort, Stephen Willis, who does Locked On Rebels, by the way, he put out his top 5 wins all time for Ole Miss. And I mean this in the nicest way possible. I was like, That's not a great list. I mean, it's just like his number 2 or number 4, I guess, depending on which way you go with it, was the 2 wins against Alabama in 14 and 15. He said, I'm combining them. There was a win against Notre Dame at home.
The ghost of Bo Wallace.
Yeah, where Notre Dame went on to win a national championship, and Ole Miss beat them that year, and that's great. But I'm saying those are your top 5 wins. And until Ole Miss does it, it's hard for me to buy into it. I want them to be, because I'm going to tell you something. I've been to a lot of Ole Miss games. The rumors are true. The legends are true. Their tailgate is the best there is. It's a lot of fun. It's very cool. I love the setting. And in a way, it's more college-y than a lot of other places that I go that are much bigger brands, right? Because it's smaller, a little more intimate, and they are kind of crazy. They're there for the game itself, not thinking about the nationwide aspect of it. But they haven't done it, and I think it's fair to say until you do it, I'm not buying it.
Luke Robinson, Locked On Bama. His thoughts speak for himself, as always. Luke, thanks for coming by.
Appreciate it.
Dylan Raiola as the best quarterback in the Big Ten this year. Not as crazy of a take as you might think. That's coming up next. This episode is brought to you by our friends at LinkedIn Jobs. When you're hiring for your small business, you want to find quality professionals that are right for the role. That's why you have to check out LinkedIn Jobs. LinkedIn Jobs helps you find the right professionals for your team faster and for free. LinkedIn isn't just a job board. LinkedIn helps you hire professionals that you can't find anywhere else, even those who aren't actively searching for a new job but might be open to the perfect role. In a given month, over 70% of LinkedIn users don't visit other leading job sites. So if you're not looking on LinkedIn, you're looking in the wrong place. On LinkedIn, 86% of small businesses get a qualified candidate within 24 hours. Hire professionals like a professional on LinkedIn. 2.5 million small businesses use LinkedIn for hiring, and they do so with good reason. Post your job for free at linkedin.com/lockedoncollege. That's linkedin.com/lockedoncollege to post your job for free. Terms and conditions apply. I got a question from one of you that really seemed like a hot take. And then the more I looked into it, it wasn't that crazy. Now, I'm not predicting this to come true, but on the surface, this may seem like an out-of-the-realm possibility, couldn't possibly come to fruition, you will not see this happen sort of prediction. Mike sent in a take that said Dylan Raiola will be the best quarterback in the Big Ten this year. Dylan Raiola is going to start at Nebraska. And if you look at what he did in the spring game, he had a couple throws that weren't great, but mostly what he did was look really, really impressive. Does that automatically translate over to the college football field in actual games? Not automatically, no. But when you look at the Big Ten, of the Power 4 conferences, they are the worst at quarterback. I don't even know if that's arguable. They are leaps and bounds behind the Big 12. That's not even, we're not even having that discussion. The SEC, I'm going to take them over the Big Ten as well. The ACC, maybe you can have an argument. Maybe you can have a discussion at least. I think I would lean towards the ACC though, because the lineup of quarterbacks in the Big Ten is just not that impressive, which is part of the reason Raiola can get there. And then you look at the stats and you go, well, he could be higher than I think. Let me ask you this question, just off the top of my head. Who led the Big Ten in passing yards last year? What individual quarterback threw for the most yards in the Big Ten Conference last year? That would be Taulia Tagovailoa of Maryland. Did you predict that? If you did, congratulations, because it's a heck of a prediction. I don't think fans outside the Big Ten landscape would have guessed Taulia Tagovailoa, who was a pretty good quarterback last year, had a 145 passer rating, went for over 3,300 yards, 25 touchdowns to 11 picks. He led the league with just over 3,300 passing yards. He was one of just two quarterbacks to eclipse the 3,000-yard mark. Do you know how many eclipsed the 2,000-yard mark? 6, including those two. There were 4 other guys that threw for over 2,000 yards. And I think the lineup of quarterbacks this year, look, some guys like Drew Aller that are returning to their teams may very well be better versions of themselves. Other teams might have upgraded, but a lot of teams, they're just kind of, they're just kind of there. So if you're going to be one of the best quarterbacks in the Big Ten, certainly passing yards is not the only metric you would look at to say, well, who's the best quarterback there? Who had the best season? It is a metric you would look at, though. And is it out of the realm of possibility to think that Dylan Raiola could go for around 3,000 yards? Not even hit the 3,000 yard mark, just around 3,000 yards, which for reference, if you play 12 games, is about 260 plus yards per game. I don't think that's crazy. I don't think it's wild. I think it comes down to a couple things. First of all, how well he adapts to the college game. Because making the jump as a true freshman, it's pretty tough to do. There have been high-profile recruits that start as true freshmen, but most guys do not start as true freshmen because it's very, very hard. It is incredibly hard. It's not that hard, Scott. Tell him, Wash. It's incredibly hard. If you understand that reference, drop me a comment because that means we think the same. But just a couple of high-profile true freshmen who started in their true freshman seasons and throughout the entire season. Well, Trevor Lawrence comes to mind. It's kind of hard to find some other ones. They're out there, but high-profile like Dylan Raiola? Few and far between. Now, Trevor Lawrence in his freshman year went for just under 3,300 yards, 30 touchdowns, and 4 picks. Oh, man, that's good. That's such a good true freshman season. But even another guy at Clemson, Cade Klubnik, DJ Uyunglele struggled. Cade Klubnik didn't start as a true freshman, and you could look at any school that you want to. True freshman quarterbacks having huge years is not supremely common because of the adjustment factor. But when you're coming into the Big Ten, yeah, Dylan Raiola could be one of the best quarterbacks in this conference this year. I can absolutely see that because you look up and down the lineup, you go, okay, you got Dylan Gabriel at Oregon. He's going to have a bunch of weapons. You got Will Howard at Ohio State. He's going to have a bunch of weapons as well once he officially gets named the starter. Drew Aller at Penn State, new offensive coordinator. Julian Fleming's a new toy for him to play with, and I think a pretty darn talented one. Okay, yeah, that could be pretty. But then where do you go from there? Are you going Tyler Van Dyke at Wisconsin? Are you going Luke Altmaier at Illinois? Aiden Childs will be his first season of actually starting throughout the entire year at Michigan State. Cade McNamara at Iowa. I mean, these are not going to be supremely high bars to cross to put yourself in the mix for being one of the best quarterbacks. And if Raiola plays the way he did in Nebraska spring game, yeah, he could be in the mix. Maybe not the best, but he can certainly be one of the best. And it may very well come down to his weapons. And this is the other question that I have about Dylan Raiola and how much success he can have this year. This is a real stat. I had to triple check this, but this is a real stat. Nebraska in 2023 only had one wide receiver over 300 yards on the year. That's just, oh man. That's rough. By the way, that individual, Billy Kemp DeForest, yeah, he was a senior last year, so yeah. They need to upgrade their weapons, let's just say. But have they gone out and made efforts to try and do that? It would appear as though they have made some effort along that front. We'll see if it's enough. We'll see if Raiola has enough support on the perimeter. So a couple names to know off the top for the Cornhuskers. Alex Bullock and Jalen Lloyd are guys who both had over 200 yards receiving last year, which on most teams, a standard offense, you could say, is like the 5th best receiver. Those guys, as wide receivers, were 2nd and 3rd in the receiving yardage department. There's a tight end who was up there 2nd in the team in yards as well. But this was a putrid passing game last year. This was an Iowa-level passing game last year. It was so bad. It can't be worse, right? Goodness gracious, for the sake of Cornhusker fans, I hope that it is not. But they brought in Isaiah Nair, a guy who has not played a lot of college football the last couple of years. He was at Texas last season, and he recorded 1 catch. His best year, though, came in 2021 whilst playing for Wyoming. He had over 800 yards in that season. You get that sort of guy, you bring in Jamal Banks, who had over 600 yards receiving each of the last 2 years with the Demon Deacons of Wake Forest, and suddenly, Mike's prediction that Dylan Raiola could be the best quarterback in the Big Ten doesn't sound so crazy, does it? Now, is this a top-flight receiving core? No, I don't think so. One thing we'll see with Bullock and Lloyd, though, is how much are they able to elevate their production because they have a better quarterback in place. That is going to be perhaps the deciding factor for Nebraska having the sort of season that I and many others think they're capable of. Nebraska's win total. What do you think Nebraska's win total is if you don't know it off the top of your head? It's 7.5. 7.5. By the way, I kind of like them over. I think that's an 8-4 football team. If Raiola is able to connect with these guys and form just a capable, don't need to be a world-beating offense, have a step forward year offensively, and use that to go recruit guys in the transfer portal that can come in 2025 and really help you out, yeah, Nebraska will be a team and a program to watch out for this year and next year as well. Speaking of the transfer portal, guys are still available. Any impact players in there? We'll talk about that next. This episode is brought to you by our friends at FanDuel. It's winner take all time in the NBA and in the NHL, and FanDuel is giving you a shot to bring home a big win of your own. Right now, new customers get $150 in bonus bets with any winning $5 bet. That's $150 to bet on spreads, money lines, player props, and more. And they have everything you could possibly want for college football. Win totals, individual games, conference title odds, national championship odds, Heisman odds. It's all over there. So go check them out today. Visit FanDuel.com/lockedon. Make every playoff shot count. FanDuel.com/lockedon. FanDuel, America's number one sportsbook and our official sportsbook sponsor here at the Locked On Network. Somehow, some way, here in the month of June, there are still impact players available in the transfer portal. Now, this is a dwindling number. I think a lot of guys that will come out of the portal and find homes in the month of June are going to be depth pieces if they're going to major programs. That doesn't mean they're all going to be that way, though. Zakhari Franklin is a name to know. So Zakhari Franklin, going into 2024, is going to play his final season of college football. How do I know that? Because it'll be his 6th season of college football. He spent 4 at UTSA. He had 2,000-yard receiving seasons over there. He spent this past season at Ole Miss. That turned into a redshirt situation. He's got the COVID year as well, so that's how he gets his 6th year of eligibility. He's still available. He was most recently, I think he's looked at a couple different spots, but the biggest program that I've seen him get tied to based on the reporting is Washington. And Washington has already got a pretty good-looking receiving core for Will Rogers to throw the football to. You got Denzel Boston, who is a promising young player. They've got Jeremiah Hunter, who's played at Cal the last couple of years, and who I've been really, really high on. I think is a high-end number 2 to a low-end number 1 in a receiving core. You put Zakhari Franklin into the mix, and that would be a 3-headed monster, not on the same level of what they had a year ago, but you'd be lessening the drop-off. You'd be chipping away at the guy's total production from that receiver room. So that's the first name to know. He's not the highest rated transfer portal player available, according to 24/7 Sports. That's Jacoby Mathews, who I'm going to talk about in just a moment. But Franklin might have the biggest upside. He might have the most potential of anybody that is still yet to find a home. He's just sitting there in the transfer portal. There are still hundreds of kids in the transfer portal. They are not all going to find homes. The grass may not be always greener for kids who go into the portal. That's not going to stop them anyway, of course. But Zakhari Franklin, that's a name to know. Jacoby Mathews is someone who's come up on this show several times over the last month and a half. Because when he first entered, there were 2 clear candidates, Oregon and Florida State. Now, when a guy of that caliber, who's a former 5-star recruit, still grades as a 4-star transfer, he had an 81 coverage grade according to Pro Football Focus, playing as a deep safety in over 500 snaps last year for Texas A&M. By all accounts, guy's a solid player. And he's the top-rated available player in the transfer portal, according to 24/7 Sports. But that's a curious thing to say, not just because of his high school recruiting profile, because when a guy goes into the portal and you immediately have reporters or people who cover recruiting putting out graphics and saying, yeah, he's tied to these 2 schools, that tends to indicate that contact has been made and the all horrible, scary, tampering has taken place, which just, let me state for the record, does not bother me. It's too extensive. It's too commonplace for me to say, this is just horrible. Nah, everybody's doing it. How do you think a guy that goes in the transfer portal and 24 hours later has made his commitment? You think he's made that decision? You think he's gone through an entire recruiting process like Dominic Williams did at TCU, who was looking at all sorts of places before he landed on Oklahoma. Do you think that guy, that those guys are just, oh yeah, no, this is a 24-hour process, getting recruited to play football at another school? No, it's not. But Jacoby Mathews still out there. Why? I don't know. Your guess is as good as mine. It was Oregon and Florida State. Oregon added a different safety, Peyton Woodyard from Alabama, and they appear to be mostly set on the back end of that defense. But that's a starting caliber player who, according to Pro Football Focus, is an above-average guy. So that's a name to know. Speaking of Oregon and Texas A&M, a couple more names coming out of the Aggies camp. Bryce Foster has been a starter at center for them over the last few years. He's been tied to Oregon. I've heard that it's close to a done deal, and he's Oregon's to lose, which is also crazy because I don't think he would go to Oregon and start. He started at Texas A&M as a freshman in 2021. He made the SEC All-Freshman team. He got injured but started the first 4 games of 2022, and he was a starting center for a large chunk of this past season as well. So that's a 3-year going into his redshirt junior campaign. Got a medical redshirt for that 2022 season that was unfortunately cut short. He's going into his 4th year. He's got 3 years, or at least 2.5 seasons worth-ish of starting experience at a Power 5 school. And he's just there. He's just available. That's the sort of guy. This is how the transfer portal works. Guys can sit there for a while. He entered a while back, and it looks like he's going to Oregon. But is that a done deal? No, because I don't know that that'd be the place where he could find the most playing time. Maybe that's not what it's about. Maybe that's not what it's about. He was looking at Oregon when he was coming out of high school in 2021, so maybe he just has always wanted to play for the Ducks, and there's an opportunity, and he's okay going to be a backup center. I mean, if that works for you, okay, that's fine. Sorry for those watching on YouTube. I got something in my eye, and it really, really itched. Okay, we're back now. Speaking of Texas A&M, do you know the name Raymond Cottrell Jr.? Because that's a guy who was part of Texas A&M's 2023 recruiting class, which was very good. He went into the transfer portal, and he was going to transfer to Kentucky. And Brock Vandegrift is expected to be the quarterback over there for Mark Stoops and company. And back in December, Raymond Cottrell Jr. was going to be an option for him to throw the football to. He's not. This is just a former 4-star wideout who has 4 years of eligibility remaining because he redshirted this past year. Only logged a handful of snaps a season ago. So you don't really know what you have, but how would you feel? Insert program of which you are a fan, whoever you are listening to or watching this show. If you just added a 4-star receiver to the room, what would your expectations? What would the potential be? What could the development be? Why didn't it work out at Kentucky? Your guess is as good as mine. He went through spring football and decided, nope, going in the transfer portal here. And he's one of those guys who, once again, is part of the new era of college football, where you go into the portal, you say, I'm going here. And then you go to spring football and you play it out and you go, no, this isn't going to work out. Now, maybe it didn't work out because he wasn't good enough over at Kentucky. Maybe Kentucky's wide receivers are just so gosh darn good and talented and deep that Raymond wasn't able to find playing time over there. Raymond Cottrell Jr. being the guy I'm referring to here once again. I just wonder. I just wonder what. There are only about 7,000 things that could cause a guy to follow that career trajectory, but this is 2024. There are no transfer portal restrictions. You may transfer as many times as you would like to. And a lot of guys take advantage of that. Look at Penny Boone, for instance. That's a guy who transferred to Louisville until he transferred to West Virginia. Like he committed to Louisville, and then he's like, no, not doing that. Rashad Amos, another running back. He was coming out of the G5 ranks, going to Colorado. He's going to Ole Miss instead. Lot can change. It is a consistently and constantly fluid situation. Heck, look at Simeon Barrow Jr. down in Miami. There were reports he was trying to get out, leave Miami, didn't want to be there, was going to leave the team. Kind of a weird situation down there. Reports are looking like he's still going to be there, and that he's going to be on the team. That's a guy who was kind of an impact transfer for the Hurricanes and Mario Cristobal. That's a transfer portal. When coaches don't want to deal with it, the Coastal Carolina baseball coach said he doesn't want to deal with NIL in the portal anymore, and that's part of the reason he's retiring. Well, kind of hard to blame him at some level. It can be a lot. Tony Mitchell's the last name. Another guy who's come up on this show before. Transfer safety from Alabama. He's just out there. That's a defensive back that has been coached by Nick Saban, who Nick Saban wanted to play, and Saban retires. He's more of a depth piece there. But in most years, a depth piece at Alabama can be a starter elsewhere. Like, you tell me Tony Mitchell couldn't walk into Vanderbilt's locker room and be a starting caliber player? I'm sorry, Vanderbilt. That felt like a cheap shot. But you get the point that I'm making. So there are impact guys available. It's a dwindling number, but it is not zero. And we'll see where these guys land. Appreciate everyone listening. I'll see you next time. And until then, hope you have a wonderful rest of your day.